They're slightly different levels, elevation. You know, am I correct that this calls for excavating most of the hill? The elevation? No.
Microphone's on.
Cue me or what?
If I need you.
Oh, good. Adam, we all set? Okay, great. Well, we'll call the meeting to order of the Design Review Committee at 5:01 and have a roll call.
Member Dryden Hess.
Present.
Member Martin.
Eyes on.
Member Lapp.
Here.
Vice Chair Jacobson Bates.
Present.
Chair Kavanaugh.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Would you please lead the
Absolutely.
pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You had an opportunity to review the agenda, and it wouldn't take you very long to do that, but is there any motion to approve the order of the agenda as presented?
I so move.
Okay, it's been moved
Second.
and seconded to approve the order on the agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye. Or should I
Aye.
ask
Aye.
for any discussion? Okay, I think that's a 5-0, and I said aye, so that's a 5-0, okay? Okay, the next item are those consent items, which are typically routine and will be approved in one motion. The chair will call on anyone wishing to address the committee on any of the consent items on the agenda, which has not been pulled by the committee for discussion. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once, and comments will be limited to a total of 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience who has an item, has any comments to make regarding an item that is on the agenda? Okay, anyone in Zoom land? No, we have people, but they're not going to make any comments on this part. So I will. You've had an opportunity to review it. That's the minutes of December 21st, and also the latest report from of the buildings and division of the building and planning and building division major projects list as of January 2004. With that, I'm open to receive a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I so move, and I add compliments on the new structure for the plan, the major project list. I like the layout.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's good. Appreciate that. Has it been moved and seconded?
No.
It's been moved.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. Thank you, Mr. Lapp. I will, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. So that's 5-0 on item.
I abstained because I
Oh,
wasn't here last month.
okay, fair enough. Thank you. It's 4-0 and an abstention. Thank you. Okay, now we're on to the public communications for items that are not on the agenda. Again, it's to provide members of the public an opportunity to address the committee on terms that are not on the agenda. And this section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes and may speak only once. State law does not allow the committee to discuss or act on the issues not on the agenda, except to briefly respond or ask staff to follow up on such items. I have one speaker slip from a Mr. Duncan. May I please come forward, identify yourself, and talk about your
Thank you, Mr.
your
Chair.
presentation, please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Committee members. My name is Lansing Duncan, and I'd like to talk to you about Site C and what a well-designed project for such a challenging, highly visible site would include. It would recognize the different topography of the site and that there are 3 different areas deserving different treatment: the low, flatter area, the slopes, and the hilltop. In this project, however, we see a cookie-cutter approach where the entire site is treated as though it were flat. 3 different treatments, and that's why we need to totally regrade the site. Really, literally, there is nothing left with an original grade here except where they see the Mission Aqueduct at the surface in one little pocket. Other than that, everything is mountaintop removal or ziggurat grading. 3 different treatments could break up the monolithic treatment you see in this proposal. And you can see that in the drawings that are down on the ground. The size of the project, both in units and square footage, needs to be reduced, with fewer units on the hilltop and a greater focus on the low, flat area of the site. This site is prominent as one enters Solvang on Highway 246 and Alamo Pintado Road. If you're stopped at the Highway 246 light, you see it. That's what you're going to see up on your right. And coming down Alamo Pintado, your gaze is directed at the hilltop for half a mile. After leaving Sunnyfields Park and the redwood trees at the bottom of the park, the road curves, and you can see the picturesque trees on the top of the hill. They'll be replaced by a 41-foot tall building, one of 3. And they won't be just on the top of that hill. They'll actually be moved 80 to 100 feet closer to the roadway because of the way the fill slope is developed up from Alamo Pintado Road. Of course, what we see now could be a straw man proposal, purposely designed to attract criticism, just as Ed St. George's Army Barracks proposal for the lumberyard was used, only to replace by who knows what. But I do want to call your attention to this because we know that when this does come to you, if it does, you will have very limited time and very limited opportunity for comment. So I'd like you all to be thinking about what is appropriate on Site C to meet the needs of Solvang's housing element, particularly as developed in a public planning process here in this very room, which was quite different from this. It was to concentrate the development on the lower, flatter half of the site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We appreciate that. Perhaps it's an opportunity because there is some kind of construction or some earth moving on the site. Someone from the city can provide us a status report on that project?
I'll provide a report during my director's comments.
Can you do it now while our people that are speaking to it are still here?
Sure. So Site C is currently a project per your major projects list awaiting resubmittal. On site over the last 2 weeks have been testing for archaeological resources. I cannot disclose what has been found on the site, nor can I disclose the work that's been done on the site.
Understood.
The site has been, going through some tests, on-site monitoring by non-site archaeologists, as well as First Nation monitors, as well as other additional monitors have been invited. And so that's what's going on, and you'll see those you'll see some site work in terms of those preliminary tests that are required by city staff, that have been directed to be provided by city staff for environmental review. So that's what you see out there. In addition to that, the city has established on its website a major projects portal, and included in that portal is the Alamo Pintado apartments, including a whole series of FAQs that discuss this exact testing that's going on, as well as questions such as whether one can enter the site to witness it, and going in if that is private property.
Okay.
So that's the update, and that's all I have so far.
Okay, good.
Thank you. There's been a lot of questions I've heard on this matter. So could you just repeat that again, Raphael? On the website, on the city website, can you define that a little bit one more time?
Yeah, so under the Planning and Building Division, there's a major projects portal, and so in that, we have 3 major projects that are going on. Obviously, our general plan updates, the Alamo Pintado project, Site C, and the third one is the rezones for Sites B and D, which I'll get into as, again, a part of the director's comments.
Okay, so Planning and Building Department tab, and then look for the major projects portal. Thank you, because that'll answer a lot of community questions.
Okay, and it was, you're waiting the resubmittal on it. So there was an initial submittal, and it was rejected or returned?
No, so as described previously to the DRC and Planning Commission,
Yeah.
there's a project submittal that was done and completed on October 5th. That's the initial submittal.
Right.
And city staff reviewed that submittal. We provided a comment letter, which is available on that web portal as well, full disclosure, full transparency.
Sure.
And there's a list of items that we required of the applicant to provide
Okay.
to us as a part of a full submittal. The applicant has until beginning of April to provide us.
So it's not really a resubmittal, but
The state of
a
California.
refinement of the
state of
initial.
California considers it a resubmittal.
Okay.
Or we call it a resubmittal.
Okay. I'm going to take the liberty of asking our speaker, if you understand that and understand at least the status of it now. We're obviously following the status of it, and you see we appreciate your information here.
Yes, and I want to thank staff for the major projects info that is provided on the website.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Are there any other public comments regarding agendas, items that are not on the agenda? Anybody in Zoom land? I don't see any response to that, so we'll go on to the next item. That's item 3, which is the discussion and possible action to provide staff direction on outdoor dining barriers and objective standards in a public right-of-way. Thank you again. Raphael, are you going to provide us an overview of this?
Yeah, just a very brief overview. And then again, this item is more of a discussion item. Just to give a bit of background and history, per the staff report in June 26 of 2023, council did discuss establishing an outdoor dining within the public right-of-way. At that meeting, the council provided some feedback that directed staff to provide options to permit outdoor dining. There were some concerns over wineries or other alcohol establishments with seating within the right-of-way, and then create sort of a consistent permitting policy. We did return to the City Council on November 13, 2003, to discuss potential processing paths for this dining in the right-of-way, and that includes providing entitlement encroachment process for both tables and chairs, as well as permanent barriers, provide standards for ease of implementation, and require other indemnification insurance and upkeep of the areas for the proposed seating. In late 2020, sort of a flashback before all that, the Branding and Design Committee, or the BDC, which was previous to you, and which you have now morphed into, had considerations of potential partial closure of Copenhagen Drive, and there was a set of design guidelines that was created as a part of that work effort. But again, Copenhagen was never shut down, and this was part of a pandemic response, and it's now reopened back up. However, that work is not forgotten. So we did include the sort of the design guidelines page that was created by the BDC at that meeting. And then we also, again, are looking to do minimum standards and operating standards, including requirements of clearance of 4 feet for unobstructed access for sidewalks of 8 feet or less. Sidewalks that are 8 feet or greater, we're looking for minimum clearances of 6. Provide, sites that are suitable for consistency with, Americans with Disabilities Act, et cetera. So the point of this discussion here tonight is really looking at permanent barriers, and again, setting up objective standards. So objective standards are those that we can, and as you've heard from previous meetings, those are standards that we can objectively weigh and identify. So that is maximum heights of 4 feet, certain percentage of foliage, et cetera. And this, this body here is the perfect vehicle to create those objective design standards, to which we will fold into a draft ordinance that will come back to both the DRC and the Planning Commission and eventually to the City Council. Again, the intention is to reduce the amount of red tape and process that these existing businesses are going through to create these al fresco dining, which is a fantastic option for our community, particularly during the fall and winter months. Spring's hit and miss, as you all know. But with that being said, this is sort of a test run for how we will create objective standards for other items, hopefully within the next year and a half. And those will include objective standards for both the TRC and our residential design standards. So with that, we'll turn it over to the DRC for hopefully a spirited discussion on those objective standards.
Okay. I have some questions, just, clarify, probably just supplement the information you've already provided. You said what we're seeing here was created as a result of the effort of the Building or Branding and Design Committee.
That's correct. So the Branding and Design Committee, particularly on page 12 and 13, provided sort of these examples of dividers and barriers. So what these barriers would be utilized is, again, as the staff report identified, there's 2 flavors. It was kind of what you see today. Flavor 1 is just the tables and chairs, and we have 3 businesses that are doing that today. Whereas during the day, when they open, they put them out on the sidewalk, and when they close, they bring them all down. Which is great in ho-hum, but there's the other sort of flip side to what you see in other larger cities is the actual permanent barriers. So that's really what we're focusing on today. Tables and chairs, pretty easy, it's pretty standard stuff. You give us an area of where you want it. We condition it. We'll likely, for tables and chairs, utilize what's called a temporary use permit, which is something that our code alludes to, but is actually not codified. Mm-hmm. We will go on and full-blown codify that and use that vehicle as a much easier way if businesses are looking to do tables and chairs. It's the permanent barriers, which is what you see in your staff report, that we're really looking at. And those are for businesses that are really looking to do this at a permanent standpoint, and particularly those businesses that serve alcohol.
And what's being recommended here is what the Branding and Design Committee passed and created themselves, or is this something that you, based on taking their product, advanced it, I guess?
Just taking their product, recognizing that some work has been done. But again, this is more of your product ultimately in the end.
Yeah, this hasn't been approved, let's
No,
say.
it is not.
It's just a work in progress.
It's not even a work in progress.
Okay.
It's an example to get you thinking of how you want to do objective design standards for barriers. And again, what are objective standards? Those are heights. Those are
Right.
colors. Actually, a color palette that if you want to go there. Those are, as long as they are specifically spelled out in an objective manner. So if you want a planter barrier and you want live foliage, then it just needs to say live foliage. If you don't want a barrier to be taller than 48 inches, then that's an objective standard, 48 inches. So it's those if you don't want wine barrels, which is what the BDC said they didn't want them, then we'd be very specific. Wine barrels are not permitted to be utilized as barriers. It's objective standards that we really want to emulate and get your input on, so that we can go back as city staff and craft this ordinance for, again, permanent structures. And by permanent is really what you're looking at is more than likely it'll be restaurants and or wine tasting facilities that are required by state law to have that sort of separation. Those are the ones that are going to be utilizing those permanent barriers.
Okay.
Could I jump in for a minute?
Sure, of course.
And Jennifer may have some comments too, because we were both on the Branding and Design Committee. These sketches and materials that are shown here were discussed at that time. Of course, a lot of this had to do with utilizing parking spaces when the roadway was closed down. These designs were pretty roundly rejected by the city council and never utilized in any specific fashion. So, I mean, I kind of consider what is shown in here as potentially having not a lot of relevance. And Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to just say that was just one concept, and that in terms of Raphael's suggestion about consistent standards is more about materials and heights and what we would like to see versus anything here that was previously presented.
I would echo that, and because I was really not clear on what the city council was looking for, I called and spoke with Councilwoman Elizabeth Arona today, just to kind of get a little bit more, because I didn't take the time to go watch the video of the meetings, because I was a little confused as to whether this is referring to barriers within parking areas, and that is absolutely not. So I wanted a little clarity on that. And of course, it is referring to seating along the sidewalk in the public way.
Right, and you brought up an excellent point, that this is not to take away parking. This literally
Yeah,
is
now
to be
this-
on the sidewalk.
So this,
Those were just examples.
well, I'm
Again,
saying, but it
Yes.
does involve the using
You gotta-
parking space.
Right.
Right.
It's just an
That's why I said
example. And
that
it,
we
so
should just
it's, use it
ignore.
as a starting point. This
Yeah.
is to jog a discussion. It's not saying that the drawing is there to be utilized as that. It's a discussion. Again, recognizing that this work has kind of been done, and can we utilize some of those points to translate it into an actual ordinance for
Is the
sidewalk?
recommendation for the minimum standards and operating standards found on page 10 the product of your office or the product of the branding committee?
The minimum standards are
2 or 3
products
years
of,
ago?
of myself, our office, and Public Works.
Okay.
So we sat down, and if this were to work, how is this, as well as the building official.
And none of that really, you're talking about the allocation of space between the business and the curb.
Yes, a clear space.
Yeah, it would not beyond the curb into the parking area.
That, no,
Okay.
again, we are
I mean,
not,
that's one-
we are not discussing closure of parking. We're not talking about parklets in the parking areas. We're not discussing, dining in parking spots. This is purely on the sidewalk.
Okay.
And there are some restaurants that don't have sufficient sidewalk. Sorry.
Right.
Unfortunately, they won't be able to do this.
Oui, my problem is the artificial look of the artificial plant. Could we have a real plant?
Yeah, that's
can be
the point of this discussion.
Yeah.
Again,
Okay.
the images that were shown in your staff report are simply just images to get your mind going. Clearly, that's been activated.
Yeah, I think it went the wrong way.
I have a question.
Yeah, I think that my concern is that, this is a big topic that, Santa Barbara is an example of spending a lot of time. Of course, there's also encompasses street areas. And we definitely, I think, need some community and business input and participation, which I think will then create a buy-in. I hope that there will be an opportunity for that. My concern is that if we come up with objective standards and do not take that input, there's going to be you're going to hear a lot of complaints post-process, and I'd like to see an opportunity to have some examples as well to craft this with.
And thank you for the comment, and that's actually the intention, because what we don't want to see is kind of take this as a blank slate, like what we're doing now. And then all the business community simply wants the path. You tell them how they want to do it. If we then have something at least in a framework that we can take back and say, hey, can this work or will this work? Then that's where you've solicit the information that they can potentially process it. Yeah, that can work for my business, or no, it cannot. Here's how we change it. But the framework's been established. That
Good.
still needs to get vetted. But in order for us to establish the framework, we don't want to do this in a bubble. I most certainly am capable, and myself and Lisa are very capable of establishing a whole slew of guidelines and not involve y'all. But that's not the intention of this. As this board, as the DRC, we are soliciting your opinion of what you, as this body, who is in charge of these architectural guidelines, to guide us into creating that initial framework, to which we then need to go back to the business community, particularly our Chamber of Commerce and those businesses that are asking for this. Does this work? And then come back with a finalized sort of, again, work in progress ordinance that we take to the finish line.
Yeah, because I'm reluctant to think that we could come up with all needed in this one evening. Perhaps I'm
Sure.
wrong. It sounds like a great place to start the discussion.
Right.
I have a question. From the curb towards the business, is there like a DMV regulation on how deep they have to be from the edge back? So if you're getting out of the car,
No.
is that
No.
a consideration?
There's not, and it can be. There are some, and that's, we have, and it depends on the street, and that's it's a great consideration as well. Should it be required that, sidewalk dining only be allowed for areas of parking that is parallel? Or, there is a sort of a bit of an overhang. Those are things, and that's an excellent point that we would need to take in consideration. I'm going to write that note down. And if the DRC so says, hey, city staff, go look at this, then that's something that myself and Roger will begin to take a look at as we, again, craft that sort of framework. This is definitely not an ordinance that's going to pop out in the next 6 weeks. It's
Sure.
going to take time.
Yeah, sure, I appreciate that.
Well, and I think of the areas in town, the parking along Copenhagen is different from Alisal, is different from Mission, is different from First Street, it's different from Fourth Place. Restaurants that have servers walking across the sidewalk with plates of food are different from an ice cream shop or another shop where you walk in and place your order and pick up inside and potentially use chairs or tables or benches or whatever. There are a lot of variables that we need to consider.
But the solution is going to be confined to the space on the sidewalk. There's not going to be any use of the space between the curbs involving the parking or the street.
I will reiterate, this is for the sidewalk only.
Right, that's right.
Period.
Yeah. So the decision's made, has been made by the city council.
Yes.
That the street's off limits.
We are
Yeah,
not
That's right.
touching parking.
Now, you all got a note, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at that, but this is something that was submitted to the committee by Jack Williams, who's chairman of the Planning Commission. And he's had an opportunity to look at this himself and just had this comment, making some changes in the limitations or the minimum clearances and so forth that are shown on page 10. You had a chance to look at that, or?
We did, I did.
Yeah,
And-
okay.
And so again, that's for your information.
Yeah.
We'll, based on the direction that we received tonight, hopefully that, again, starts that framework discussion. I've yet to share the information with our Public Works Director. We didn't meet in our typical Wednesday. We meet weekly to discuss these type of items.
What is the width of the sidewalk? I mean, Jack talks about it here to make sure that the sidewalk width is measured and how that's measured is defined and verified and so forth. But along Copenhagen,
Well, it varies.
It varies.
Yeah.
Hence why the
Lots of
standards,
variable.
hence why the standards are.
so what
are
is,
varying.
what is the range?
It ranges all from 6 to 10. That's
Okay.
Yeah. So
Or more.
correct.
Yeah.
So it's variable, which is why we need to establish, again, the framework establishes where that measurement point starts.
Right.
And that's a very technical discussion between Public Works and the building official and, our department.
Well, and I think that information is something that would be very useful up here when considering ADA requirements. I think of a stroller and a wheelchair passing, and the Christmas holiday season here in Solvang has certainly shown us that our sidewalks are not meeting the demand of the foot traffic coming through. So I'd like to start by asking, are there requirements in place for ADA for for two-way?
The minimum requires 4 feet. That's why
4 feet?
That's why I
Oh,
start with
that
4 feet.
is, even
Sure.
with like two wheelchairs?
is-
Okay.
4 feet. That's why it
All right.
starts at 4 feet. That is the bare minimum requirement that we have.
So I'm going to say something about this because again, back to objective standards where sidewalks vary down any street. A best practice that I understand is that you would have the dining closest to the door of the restaurant or the service point. So that, to your point, Esther, that service people are not crossing traffic with pedestrians. So if the seating cannot be adjacent to the building and there's not leftover room for that 4-foot access because you have tree wells or other impediments, then you shouldn't have a restaurant
I think
seating
that-
there.
doesn't that first
is a
item-
big deal because.
It is.
I agree.
Because I don't think it's right to create the other issue by allowing the seating to be on the other
On the
side
curb,
of
yeah,
the
whatever.
circulation.
Yeah, I think that number one bullet handles that pretty, it says we require that tables be located directly in front of a business, so there's
Well, that means.
no
that could
walking
be-
space between the
that
building
isn't how I
and the table.
interpreted
Yeah,
that.
no, I think that just means that
Yeah.
here's, the
Correct.
business property is here, it has to be in this print, it can't
Yeah,
be here.
I'm saying immediately
Oh, I see- I
adjacent
see-
to
I see
the
directly. I see.
frontage or the
Yeah.
facade
I see.
of the business, which
I
is
see.
different.
Yep.
Is
I got it.
actually the opposite of how it is currently implemented in town, in large part, it seems, because of what you mentioned, the tree wells and the visitors, the window shopping, so to speak, with the windows. Being across would seem to be functional if you're buying your Ebbelskever or your ice cream and you've already got it in your hand and you're either walking down the street or you're walking over. Being across, we've all seen how problematic that can be at several of the establishments in town. And I know from speaking with their staff, they really don't like walking full plates of food through the pedestrian lane, so to speak, of traffic on their way to the table. And, with our world since post-COVID or since our COVID world, nobody really wants that so much either. So,
As I said, it's not a best practice to have, put your servers at risk with cross-traffic of that many people. So,
As a practical matter, crowded aisles in restaurants are no different than a crowded sidewalk. The health department, if there are any concerns, would be the one to weigh on that matter. The reality is, there are very few places in the city that could do outdoor dining if you made it be adjacent to the building.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because I think of the ones that do utilize it, it is pretty much across the sidewalk. My concern is when that pathway is especially constrained, because there's kind of overuse of the public right-of-way and heavy foot traffic, which makes all these considerations really difficult, and there's so many variables to this. Are there other communities in our, kind of tri-county area that might have a similar situation that we might be able to look at models? I think of,
San Luis Obispo, I think, has it. Jack and I went up there actually a couple of years ago, and what they had done was fairly impressive. But it was on the street, though.
Or could it be seasonal? Sometimes sometimes it's allowed and sometimes not,
Well, yeah,
depending.
yeah, that's the intention of the way it's permitted. And again, tables and chairs, it's temporary. We'll treat that in a different permitting process. Permanent barriers is a different story. We've still yet to come across which the best permitting practice for that yet, which, to be frank, doesn't exist in our code. So,
Yeah.
but again, that is, San Luis Obispo does have a set of guidelines, as well as City of Santa Barbara, looking at Paso as well, Paso Robles.
Yeah, in the square.
Right. So, those are taken into consideration, again, what are the best practices? But at the same token, that is something that we can take in, but, we have to be flexible too at the same token.
Couldn't it, but it could also be, I hear the issue at hand. Couldn't it be a matter of limiting the number of tables or limiting the number of, how big those tables are and being more thoughtful about that than trying to just maximize the number of outdoor seats?
That's the objective part.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
I'm asking the question from my fellow members,
Yeah.
From the perspective of trying to visualize this, is there any mapping of the area that would indicate where this would be allowed under any circumstances? Because as you said, there's a lot of areas where there's just not enough sidewalk. Would we be able to obtain something that would help us better understand how it would be practiced by looking at a map? I tend to be a visual person, so, looking at, Fourth Place where it's not going to happen versus Mission Drive across the street where it could, it can happen. And one more question in the equation is there are many places that are utilizing their privately owned spaces that also spill out into public spaces. Think of areas such as over by Chomp, by the Burgers, where they have a lot of the space which is on their property. So trying to understand where this will be used helps with understanding what might be the best option. I don't know if that kind of mapping exists.
It doesn't, but for sure, Mission is off the table.
Oh, okay, see,
I
I did not understand that, so that's,
Mission's
okay.
off, it's a Caltrans facility. That's why we're not touching it.
Well, that's
So-
already.
That's good.
Yeah, that changes the equation right off.
And again, we're dealing with seating in the public right away, so private property, not involved in this either. This is simply an exercise of public, use of
Right.
our public right away.
But like I said, you've already defined what isn't included. That helps when thinking about it. So it would focus on the obvious Copenhagen, LSL, and then first, potentially second. I don't know if there's space there. Fourth, it doesn't seem like there
Maybe
is.
just a color-coded map of,
Yeah, that area.
This is
Yeah.
4 feet yellow across, but again, when you're out looking for a site as an owner, some sites have better amenities than other sites. And that's just the way real estate is.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you're out looking, you're looking for the site criteria that hits, what you're looking particularly for. I think if we're continuously worried about people who have been established for a long time, I'm not sure that we will get to a place that would allow it, right? We just need to say, okay, if we want to allow it, these are the conditions that it would be allowed. And you either, if you're here already and you're established, you either get a benefit or you don't get a benefit. I do think if the city council wants to encourage it, then you just say, okay, this is where it makes sense and it can occur safely and effectively. And some places are going to win that lotto and some are not.
And it's clear that the additional dining is needed, certainly during peak times, because a shortage does exist of both food service establishments and spaces to serve as was an example, again, referencing the kind of peak time of the holiday season. So I believe that our goal is to make this, happen. Question in regards to the current locations that currently utilize the public right-of-way. Will they be held to the new standards? Are they grandfathered in? How will that work?
3 of them were issued encroachment permits in perpetuity. However, as Roger and I discussed, Public Works Director, there's language in there that says that can be rescinded by the council. So that ultimately becomes a council question.
All right. Because there's an equity issue that comes into play as well, which we have, had to deal with.
I wouldn't necessarily equate it to equity.
Okay.
It's more of, it's a council decision of, do they want these restaurants to play by the rules for things such as indemnification of, city, use of city property, insurance, maintenance. Do we collect rent? Do we not collect rent? There's a lot of
Yeah.
questions. So ultimately, again, it's a council issue. But the point of tonight is not to debate the merit of whether we want it or not.
Right.
The point of this evening is to focus in on objectively, what do you want to see? What can we craft as a part of a framework for those barriers? So I want to kind of steer the conversation away from if, because that's not the question here. The question is, what objective standards should city staff be looking at? And if so, what could those be?
You want to see terracotta, live plants, 3 feet, 2 feet, blah, 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 done.
Yes.
If it was that prescriptive, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
If you, no, but if you wanted to be that prescriptive, or
Right.
it could be objective parameters.
That too.
Yeah.
Yes. Which I think is going to be necessary given the variabilities
Yeah.
in the location. The use of benches and chairs and such is also important and useful. I would like to encourage our committee here to set some standards for that as well, so that we aren't seeing white plastic chairs and that type of thing. And we did address that back in the day with the Branding and Design Committee when these, COVID responses were envisioned. So I think what I'm hearing from Mary Vaughn is that encourage or require live plants that are maintained as opposed to artificial. So that would be an objective standard. We can save right away, potentially.
We all
One
agree
thing.
On that one.
The barriers, to define barriers effectively is why I was asking about where they would be utilized. So is it understanding that this has to do with alcohol service and the need to define that by ABC requirements?
Correct. So, barriers can come in all flavors. I've probably seen it where your travels. It can come in wide barrels with rope.
Yep.
It can come with just the typical rope barriers that you see in movie theaters or, TSA lines, et cetera.
Chains and.
Chains, yeah. So the question just becomes, is that okay? And if it's okay, then make it so. Or give them a laundry list of items that, again, are okay. And with the intention being is this framework that we come about and we develop and we, obviously go back to the business community and you, the DRC. Ultimately, the end goal is to provide a pathway for these businesses to apply and obtain a permit as quickly as possible if they check mark the boxes.
Yeah.
If they don't check mark the boxes, that's okay too, because we don't want to say no. but we give them what I call an off-ramp, and that off-ramp would be a public hearing with y'all, and provide us the reason and rationale of why they decided to do the off-ramp.
Yeah, because again, it's really hard because there are so many variables. And the other objective too is to have whatever it is that's utilized be something that looks intentional, fits within the environment, isn't going to blow over in the wind, and those are, that will work year-round and be maintained. The responsibilities that are outlined here with, indemnification of the city and a liability release, I'm shocked that that isn't in place now. So that would seem a necessary part of the standards.
It's not, hence why it's there.
Yeah, understood.
I mean, I think from a barrier perspective that intentional is hard to, it's
Yeah.
hard to define intentional. So
Yes.
I think if it was, it's like a like a material of metal or wood, it has it's like an ordered, I'm thinking like, placement. That's an intentional design, like a spacing. It's an ordered barrier, and some a metal or a wood or something substantial that, again, weather preventing. But like we could go so far as to say no plastic
Yeah.
Yeah.
be used, whether in planter, divider, chain, no plastic at all as
Right.
a
Excellent.
material.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. You have this one in here, which is interesting to me. It's the wooden one. And one of the advantages is over this eats up space that would otherwise be provided, with the big wide planters and so forth. I mean,
we don't
sort of
care,
less is
though.
more, I
I
think.
mean,
It's in such a tight environment. I mean, you're talking about a minimum of 4 feet in sidewalks that are 8 feet or less. Well, if they're less than 8 feet, then what you have is
right, but that barrier
3.5
type-
feet or something like that for the restaurant.
But Patrick, that would be their choice, and that would then take up their seating.
So they would have,
So it has we don't care
Okay.
about the depth of the barrier, really. I
Right, the barriers would be measured from the edge of the
Right.
barrier to.
To the clearance.
To the clearance.
Yeah.
Right.
So if a business
have a-
owner wants to have a very wide planter,
then he has less seating.
cool?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I see. I guess I'm trying to look out for the restaurateur, but they'll look out after
Yeah,
their own
but
interest.
that's their choice.
Yeah, I
really.
understand.
So,
And barriers like the planter box that's shown on page 16, the one like this, they're really narrow too. Another good reason to not utilize plastic is based on seeing things during COVID. There were a lot of plastic planters, and the plants were constantly blown over. Height limitations are also, I think, should be incorporated in here, because it should not screen out all view
that's right.
of the surrounding area. It should just stop foot traffic from crossing.
I think a seated height, which is like around 48 inches, is probably
Max.
reasonable.
Yeah.
So max is 48,
Yeah.
thank you. So one thing to keep in mind, I know Lisa and I met with a prospective winery that was looking to do this, and something creative, which, her and I brought up, but could also be energized in there, is would seating as a barrier be acceptable? So again, I know pictures are 1,000 words, so unfortunately I don't have a picture of it. But essentially, you utilize a barrier where the barrier itself acts as a seating, as
Like
a
a
very
bench
like a
back.
bench.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can sit
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
and you can do your tasting while doing the street watching
Yeah.
that is available to you.
Yes.
Yeah, as long as that's a wood material or a hard
Yeah,
material.
Great.
wood and metal.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Well, and
That's smart use of
for
space.
benches, this isn't pertaining to necessarily this conversation, but it's still benches, there's kind of a mishmash. It would be lovely to do like they do in Copenhagen. They have these benches that are called Copenhagen benches, and in fact, one of those came to Elverhoy and sits in the back garden. It actually came from Copenhagen. It's a wood and metal bench, very, very heavy, and that's what you see all over the city and in fact, all over the country. The benches within the public spaces are all of that variety. And I know that it's very difficult to tell people the exact bench that you have to have because we don't have a Solvang bench. But saying that it has to be, something that is able to hold, structurally hold people and be out of wood and metal so that it doesn't blow over and nondescript kind of, rather than being something super decorative in an area that has a lot of visual stimulation, would be my suggestion. Solvang downtown is amazing in all of its stylistic details, but sometimes it's like, sensory overload when there's additional elements placed in, and that's why what we're doing and discussing seems to me to be so important.
I have a question. If we decide that the plant needs to be live of the flower, but who pay for it? Who would maintain them?
Property owner would, or
The
the
owner?
owner, yes. We're not maintaining that.
So that could be reinforced, like the hotel in the corner. It's with a brick where they still have to fix some.
Yeah, so as a part of the vision is, again, we would be issuing some sort of use permit, whether it's temporary or another vehicle that has conditions. And so if they're utilizing live plant material, the condition would be very clear. They got to maintain it.
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty of conditioning these things, is once it's conditioned and it's blessed, then code compliance can then point out the conditions and if they're out of whack and if they're not, and if they continue to be out of compliance with their conditions, then these can be revoked through obviously a different vehicle. So that's the intention.
I think, too, we need to make it so that it's something that can be maintained and will be maintained, because we certainly know that even with very objective sign standards, that, compliance officer has to spend way too much time on people who are knowingly out of compliance. So we want to make it, ultimately, my goal would be that it would be something that would be maintained well and look good, obviously, and be effective.
Look of the city.
Has your organization, in California developed, or are they in the process of developing it, particularly developing standards that are informed by the experiences of other cities who have had the parklet,
Yeah, it's not a parklet.
Well, but that's what it's been. I mean,
Street
No.
di-
No,
street
it's not. Okay.
dining, street dining.
But benefit from what worked and what didn't work during that process to help inform us.
Right, and yes, we look at other jurisdictions that have passed this and are going through that, and that, yes, that we are doing that.
So, speaking to your consideration also in terms of building no more than what the bathroom or ADA accessibility requirements would dictate by the property. In other words, if you have one restroom in your facility, then you would have a limited number of capacity, correct?
Yeah, so that's the intention of the floor plan review.
Right.
is-
And so would we want, or could, or should we have a maximum capacity per site, like in the site plan on the sidewalk? So like.
That would probably be a function of, again, fronting the business So if you have a 50-foot linear frontage, then all you would get is 50 feet if you can make the clearance.
Right, but do
But
we
then-
want to limit how many you jam into that 50 feet?
But then the second one,
Yeah.
and the second number, it becomes, can that, let's just say they're able to get 4 tables in. Does that 4 tables then trip up the additional 20 tables that are inside, which thereby increases the occupancy demand, which thereby then, once you're over 50, it becomes a huge endeavor for the business owner, the property owner, to then start making ADA upgrades, and then therefore that would automatically drop that number.
Right, but I'm thinking in the other case of they wouldn't trigger it, but they really want to get the maximum number of tables out there to the point that it's hard to get up and get around the tables. And so I'm
Yes.
thinking more about it looking good also versus it looking like you're just maximizing the footprint outdoors
You
to
could,
the
in
extent
you
that
could, in
can.
theory, provide a minimum clearance between chairs and tables.
That's what I'm
That's
kind
the
of
way
getting-
you're
okay.
leaning. Or again, you're not saying, okay, 3 tables max.
No,
You're
I'm
instead
saying circulation around
Yeah.
those tables.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that-
And you're not saying it has to be, maximum of 24-inch table in this
No, I'm
space or
just
anything like
saying you
that.
need
Yeah.
a circulation around each table of, say, 3 feet or 2, I don't know. I architecturally, I know there's a number for that. I just
there's a
don't have it
formula.
on the top of my head right now.
Yeah.
Essentially, we'd have to go back and confer, particularly with building staff. But this is something that also we would need to confer with our business community of what
Yeah,
that
of
clearance
course, but
is.
I'm-
But I get what you're saying is, city staff, you should direct to look at minimum clearances
Yeah,
between tables.
right.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for getting there with me.
And
Raphael.
again, I want to go back to this food served restaurant style, at the table and brought to you by a server versus food that you're consuming that you purchased inside that's to go, in essence, yeah. There seems to be 2 different, it could be a higher density almost within the to-go eating area. But if you have a space required for movement around, then they can have a little tiny table or just chairs. Whereas if you're a food service, you're going to need to have a bigger table, and it kind of will be limiting in the number of tables that are occupying a space.
That's a really good point, because what you could do is, if you don't have enough clearance next to the door, next to the establishment, then you have to pivot to no service. You can have those tables opposite the circulation, but you're not serving them.
Right.
They can be served, dine outside, but it's a pick up and sit system, not maybe a service system.
At the
Because
table.
that would get them there, so you could still sit outside and dine, but you're not putting the servers at risk.
Right.
So you could have both options,
There is not
basically.
a liability question there too? If the server spills the food on someone? No.
Hot food, coffee on somebody walking by. She talked about liability. Yeah. And that's correct. Yeah. Or, I know during COVID, because there was spaces that were occupying both sidewalk and street, and of course, there was a curb to step down there. And it just was something that a lot of businesses expected the city to take care of. If the city is allowing a business to utilize public space, there needs to be some requirements of the business to do so.
And can the city be held responsible if something happens?
Not under the new ordinance, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the intention, is to
Yeah.
ensure an indemnification
Yeah.
and insurance and other things that were name insured, et cetera. So that's a part of the new ordinance. kind of pivoting back to the discussion of weight service versus non-weight service, again, the intention of the ordinance is not to overburden our business community and not to dictate business plans. So I highly recommend sticking with a clearance. Again, that's trying to be
Yeah.
flexible and understanding that.
Are there any requirements of Alcohol Beverage Commission that impact this?
Yes.
I mean, other than yeah, go ahead. I mean, you
Yes,
know,
that's why the barriers are the
the
issue.
barriers are, that's
Yes.
the main reason that you have the barriers, I suppose.
It is it is the
One of
reason
the
why.
reasons.
Well,
Okay.
and trying to do wine service, which is what I think of as being the primary, doing alcohol service on the sidewalk. At this time, there's nobody you're not getting it to go. You have to be served. And it's all on the other side of the sidewalk.
That's where it is now.
Right. So it concerns me about the clearances, that they need to be very, it has to be very specifically stated what the minimum clearance is. And it's probably going to be difficult to differentiate between food service versus to-go eating. And it would be nice in some areas to have a little bit more seating and have it be a defined area. And not all the businesses need to have barriers. Those would only be required, if I understand, for a business that is going to serve alcohol.
Potentially.
Unless we say everybody has to have a barrier.
No,
Yeah.
it could also, again, that's a function of the business.
Yeah.
A business could, in theory, set up a permanent barrier and then just leave rather than taking their tables in and out every single
Yeah.
night, they leave them up because that's their
Right.
space.
Okay.
So that there are advantages and disadvantages both
Okay.
ways. Again, the advantage of just bringing tables and chairs is you bring them in and out every single night and they're locked up. Disadvantage is you got to bring them in and out
Yeah.
every single morning and every single night. So that's time and effort and a cost to the proprietor.
Right. The businesses that do leave their chairs and tables out all the time should be required to make them accessible if they're occupying space when they're not in business. So if they're serving breakfast and lunch and done at 2:30, they shouldn't just leave the tables there and take away all the chairs. They should leave the chairs to make it functional or take away the chairs and the tables to open it all up, would be a recommendation that I'd like to see in there. So either you're leaving it for public use after hours and public space, or you're taking it all away, not just making it not functional, but occupying the space. Does that make sense, team?
I don't know. I'm,
I think it
I have a comment.
yeah. Please.
So Disneyland is amazing for foot traffic, crowd control, and also being gorgeous. They use very low metal painted cast iron planters with chains that are very elegant, which would fit very well within the Solvang vibe.
As
I
long
think-
as we don't say it's like Disneyland.
Of course, there was no other way to get around that but that. But it does invoke a clearer vision of what that is and what we should be going for.
That's a good observation, yeah.
Well, and that could have the aesthetic of the wrought iron, for which, the old world is well-known, and there's lots of that's crafted in the community.
That's what we're missing, because if we come up with plastic, no plastic, wood, bank, this, that, it's going to turn out to be a hodgepodge of terrible, and I don't want to see that.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. And there's a simplicity in this could be the best option as well visually.
So
Again.
I'd like staff to take a look at that. I'm sure there's images all over the place of downtown, whatever that place is called.
I don't know, I guess, again, this is having worked for Disney, and also working for a financial now. I don't think it's necessarily required to dictate that everyone does the same thing. And I think it sort of falls in the same category of respecting companies' brands and their images and who they are, and to say that just because we are, we have our brand of little Copenhagen, we should still be flexible around people's visions for what their guest experience is trying to be. And so I guess there's probably a hybrid, and maybe it just comes down to a kind of a menu of options, so they're not,
And a color palette.
yeah, so they're not,
Yes.
it's not anything, but it's not one thing. So, right, so I think it.
Agreed.
Yeah, it needs to just be a limited then number of options.
Menu of choices,
Menu
yeah.
of choices.
Yes.
And so that would,
I'm okay with that.
yeah.
Yeah,
I am too.
agreed. And that works in the sense that unlike that place, the sidewalk, there's a lot of different variabilities in where these could be set. It isn't a consistency like there is,
That's very planned environment.
Yes, yeah,
Extremely.
exactly.
Good.
And planned around that pedestrian
Yeah.
traffic and funneling people, which of course is an essential element of all of this too, ultimately.
Good. What's your plan from us? I mean, you're going to work on it, bring back a draft, or?
Did we give you enough?
No, I mean,
Start with-
you have. We've hit on quite a few things, but the bigger ones is, and I'll run them through. So, use of live plant material, the use of metal and wood material for barriers, no plastics, no chains, no barriers. It set aside a minimum clearance.
Wait, back up, you said no chains. I don't know if we meant do we mean no chains?
I originally did, because I was thinking of the worst case, like plastic or fluorescent type chain, I just.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
we'll specify
think we need to just
the chain
tailor it.
type.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But that's what I meant, like a
Good.
basic, chain that like a chain link fence, those
Right.
type of things.
Yeah,
Ensured minimum clearances are there, and then the menu of options is really what it comes
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
down to.
Yeah.
So really, again,
Height.
height
Height.
again.
Yes.
48 was the max height, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah,
Commissioner
and-
Lapp had mentioned. But
that
they,
might
but
even need to be lower.
I was thinking the same thing. That
Yeah.
might need to
Well-
be lowered some way, because you want people out there to be able to,
to
see the
to
surroundings.
Sit and see, kind of.
But some people might not want that
To sit and see,
experience.
yeah.
So that's why
So-
I'm saying that
so
would be
m-
maximum.
Yeah, so my suggestion typically is to do the max height at 36. And then if you want to do the additional 12, there's some transparency requirements, whether it's 50% transparent,
Oh, okay.
75% transparent, and how you get there, you do it through vegetation or some
Right.
sort of screening
Yeah,
or
that's
other
great.
things. Again, that's giving that latitude and flexibility to the property owner to figure
Yep,
that out.
That's
good.
Oh, well, there you
Okay.
go.
Yeah,
As I said, I could potentially write this myself, but here I am.
yeah, that's great.
Have I missed anything?
Well, again, I can't say, I think you can, if you go back to some of the conclusions, your organization and the similar, other municipalities, other counties, but, working through this post-COVID, objective standard world that we live in, see what they've done on this.
I think the reality is, ultimately, in the end, we greenlight this, and you spoke, what's the process from here on out? The process is we go back and we do a framework. But we take that framework and we meet with the chamber and hopefully get a better sense of what the business community is at a special meeting with the chamber. Then from there, that framework comes back to you guys in a ordinance form with a little bit more visuals, obviously.
yeah,
And-
I feel like before it goes to the chamber, I would like us to spend a little bit more time on some of these elements.
Okay.
with color and materials, with examples, because right now there's no.
With the menu of options that
Yeah.
we'll have.
Yeah, and, some of us may be able to share, do something and share it with staff that for consideration in a future packet. In other words, I feel like it's not, I know you're going to put it into a more cohesive form, but our role here needs to be a little bit further in defining the aesthetic portion of it.
Yeah, because I just thought of another one we missed, which was canopies, like, do we allowing umbrellas or canopies
That's a
for
good
Right.
point.
shade?
That's a good
Yeah.
one.
And they're currently,
Yeah.
umbrellas are currently allowed
Yeah,
now.
they are.
Same with space heaters, but again, how you define those and et cetera. So
Right.
we can include that as an item as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will write that down.
And because I think the current requirements for umbrellas, but maybe this was back in the
It was.
BRs, okay, was that they be solid color,
Correct.
not flowers and stripes, and we see all kinds of variations now, so umbrellas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no code right now on that, is that on umbrellas?
Sounds like there's not.
Yeah,
Just thought, having recently been in the food service industry, hardly being related to it, some vendors will purchase them for the restaurant
Yeah.
if they have their advertising on it. So you need to think about whether or not you want to allow that, because that obviously will influence things too. So for purposes of business, that may be a good idea to allow it, but then you end up with a mishmash of Coke, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper
yeah.
kind of thing
Yeah.
too. So I mean, that's
Or
something to
that
think about.
Italian soda or whatever.
Right.
Lighting also, I believe that lighting needs to be considered in this, because I know that in the past, there was a lot of mishmash of lighting that came into play during COVID, and there should be lighting addressed so
Right.
that we, avoid
Get it
that.
before it comes to us.
Yeah,
I think you're probably referring to like a net of lights over the barrier, is that what you're?
String lights.
string lights, yeah, in the barrier and kind of running across
Yeah.
and doing the, which there's some rules in place, but, I think it needs to be clarified.
They'll need to be compliant with code. I mean, that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can't overload the circuits and,
Yeah.
Yeah, the minimum height requirements for
right, and the other thing I was going to say, is a lot of the discussion this evening has been about liability and kind of legal issues, and those are all handled through the legal, process.
Yay.
So we shouldn't need to spend too much time on that, because there'll be contracts, and, again, as Raphael pointed out, some kind of a use permit.
Yeah, and
something.
that's laid out in here pretty well already. I
That
mean,
will
that's
kind of
that's
define
standard.
that.
Yeah,
And have
that's right.
requirements for that, and if they don't meet those minimum requirements, they don't get it.
Right.
So,
That's good.
it's kind of reiterate, kind of what
That's a
Raphael
good
was
point.
saying earlier too. We're looking to the committee to provide direction regarding, the specifics, the objective standards of design, and then that allows him and his staff to move forward.
Yeah, I
Um,
think
yeah.
it seems as though we've got a lot of the bones of it started. Now we have to flesh that all out. And honestly, like I said, I wasn't real clear what I was coming in here to discuss because the pictures confused me. So,
Yeah, and I apologize for that, but ultimately, in the end, this is exactly what we were looking for.
Okay, good.
Is a good litany of list of direction, to which then we go back and we formulate into something, what I call working draft. While it won't be what we typically would show as an ordinance, it's the bullet points, and then add sort of that, add the pictures and then essentially what that does is twofold. One, it then helps to create the ordinance itself, but two, it also allows us then to turn that into a nice little pamphlet and handout, to which obviously everyone weighs in on. So
I just, one quick, before we end, was that Jack's comment helped me understand the 4 feet maximum better, because I was unclear as to how if it was 8 feet wide, you wanted to retain 6 feet, that would leave only 2 feet. So I thought his rewording of it actually
Right.
solved the math problem.
Yes.
So I just wanted to state that I
That's right,
thought
yeah.
the way he said it was very clear. So I understood it. I was confused by the 8 and the 6.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, anything else on this item at this time? I appreciate this opportunity to have the committee weigh in on this and look forward to the next round.
When is that? Just out of curiosity, is that next meeting or is that down the road?
It's going to be down the road. It's
Okay.
really, it's dependent on work efforts. This item was actually originally slated for December, but appeared it was not going to have small quorum, so we punted it to January. But this was a perfect opportunity with just the one singular item, so
Yeah.
that you focus your energy.
That's great.
So I would assume the way our timeframes are working right now, and I'll get into it in my report, but more than likely, late winter, early spring. So.
Okay?
I have a comment.
Okay, great, thanks, everyone. Do we have any committee, what's that, I'm sorry?
It's a funny comment. Are we going to congratulate the new king of Denmark?
You get to do that
That's right.
in the comments, committee comments.
Yeah, we'll do that. Do we have any committee member comments, any other committee member comments? That counts, the record will show that.
I was awake at 5:08 to do that, watch the whole thing.
Oh, did you? Oh, good.
Sunday morning.
Good.
Just for the committee's edification, the mayor signed letters to both the Queen, thanking her and congratulating her on her successful reign and congratulating the new king.
Terrific.
I attempted to get them out via Federal Express today, ran into a snag, so those should be posted tomorrow. And on Monday at our council meeting, there will be a proclamation read.
Oh, good.
Good,
Thanks for sharing that, good.
yeah.
Are there any other committee member comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll go to city staff comments.
I'd like to turn the floor to Randy Murphy, our city manager.
Okay.
So I wanted to share with this committee and the public, we are in the process of scheduling the meeting, but we're going to have a council goal-setting meeting on Saturday, March 9th. The location has not yet been verified, but it will be somewhere within the city limits of Solvang, not in the council chambers. The start time will be 9 or 10 and go for approximately 5 or 6 hours. You all are invited to come and provide your thoughts to the council. We have a facilitator whom I've worked with in the past, former city manager of places like Beverly Hills and Novato, California. So he's very good at what he does. And anyway, just giving you a heads up to save the date and come in and participate.
Is there going to be the capacity to participate on Zoom as well, or is this an in-person?
No, it will be only in person. Again, we're not having it set up for a Zoom meeting, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Well,
Thank you.
another question about that, is there going to be some kind of an agenda, like because I know.
Yeah, there will be an
go all
agenda
day.
published beforehand, but
Okay.
primarily it's an interactive process, an iterative process with the council. The facilitator will reach out to them individually to solicit input and then kind of start the dialogue. The public is invited, you all as committee members are invited, planning commission will be invited to be able to listen and add things to the process.
Okay.
A list of, items will then be developed. Staff will be there also to be processed, or part of the process. And then the list ultimately will come to council in a general meeting, where it will be adopted, and we'll use that to help develop the budget.
I can be there
Very
at
good.
lunchtime.
Very good. Any other staff comments?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Randy. So as an update to where we're at with certain projects, as you know, I did iterate with Site C. As many of you probably have gotten your ear bit about what's going on with that. We will reiterate with you to, you will have a role in that project, so therefore, avoid posting on social media, avoid
Good.
signing petitions, try to be impartial as possible. I know this is a project that is near and dear to a lot of folks' hearts. It's a substantial change. However, we are not alone.
Yep.
There was a great article in the Santa Barbara Independent this morning.
I saw that.
In regards to the builder's remedy,
In Santa Barbara.
and throughout the county, actually.
Yeah, well, but they're really talking about,
Right, but Lompoc,
but that's right.
Lompoc has one. Orchid as well has a very large one, so we are not alone.
Yep.
Again, just keep that in mind. And again, I understand and I feel for the community because they want as much information as possible regarding this project, which is why we set up those website portals. And as we get those submittals in the effort of being transparent to the public and you, the committee members, we will be posting what we receive in from the applicant, what we can. There'll be some studies, obviously, we cannot post. That'll be in draft form. So those we won't be able to post,
Yeah.
but we can be able to post drawings.
Yeah.
With that being said, city staff, particularly Lisa, has been leading the effort on our housing element rezone sites. So for those that don't know, the housing element was certified or was approved by the city council in December. It went ahead and we transmitted it to the state of California. HCD got back to us 2 weeks ago, letting us know that we'd have a very truncated review time simply because we have followed a very streamlined process of review with HCD. So we're hoping to hear back from the 31st. With that being said, we
Good.
have a much more truncated time frame to meet our required rezones. So Lisa has been in charge of the rezone projects. Those will be going to before the Planning Commission in March. And so there's been chatter as well in regards to this, additional condo developments. This is just a project site rezone, no more, no less, no proposed projects. At this time, it's simply rezoning the land for any future development, and any future development that comes forward will then have to do project-specific environmental review as well as project-specific review from our end, as well as the DRC's end. So
Okay.
that's in the works now.
Excuse me, Raphael, does that reflect the general plan that we've been working on
It reflects the adopted housing element.
of the general plan?
Yes.
Okay,
There's only one element that's been adopted, and it's
Right.
the housing element.
Yeah.
So
okay,
it reflects that.
good, yeah, just clarifying, thank you.
Yeah, implementing that part. So we do have 1714 Mission Drive, which was the deli. If you did not notice that pop up on your major projects list, that is coming back in for an amendment. City staff has reviewed that. We're wrapping up our review tonight, actually, and issuing out a letter to the applicant tomorrow morning with, we'll need more information. But again, that's something that actually will come to you. I don't know what meeting that will be in front, but it will be back to you. They are amending portions of their plans for what was originally a sit-down restaurant. They're amending that portion. But again, we had quite.
It's Luca.
Right. We had quite a substantial amount of comments, so we don't know what's going to happen based on our comments.
Yeah, the former bank.
Right.
site.
Somewhere bank building, yes. And outside of that, that's the general plan. Our GPAC committee will be meeting next Thursday for the first time in quite some time. I'm looking forward to meeting our GPAC members. But as far as the general plan update goes, we are almost to the finish line. We are in our final review of an administrative draft EIR. We're hoping to get an EIR out to the streets for the public review 45 days by the end of February. And then from there, we'll have a 45-day review. Then it goes before the Planning Commission and City Council. So we're hoping to have all of that wrapped up by the beginning of summer. But for those that served on the GPAC, this is a big milestone, and we'll talk about that at our meeting. But
Well, we appreciate your good efforts and so forth to continue that process, but we especially are thankful that Esther and Jennifer so ably represented the Design Review Committee on that process.
correct. And as Randy mentioned, the March 9th, the goal-setting session, which I would encourage any public to be involved. That will help set our goals, particularly our department, for the next 2 years. There's a lot of work to be done, and so we need a starting direction. hopefully we hear from folks and residents and we get that direction that we need as part of that goal setting. So with that being said, that'll wrap up my report for this evening.
Great, thank you so much. Anything else to come before the committee this evening? Anybody in Zoom land? I guess not. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting at 6:23. Thank you all.